pray you would continue to speak through Jason, Lord, and give him the wisdom and the words to speak, to present it clearly and in a way that is easy to understand and presentable. We thank you, Father, for the clarity of your word that has been preached or presented this the last couple of days. We commit this evening into your hands in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Thank you, Sam.
Thanks, Jason.
Oh, good evening. Just a quick note on that survey that was handed out. I want you to hear that it is totally anonymous. We don't want names, so that you can. The purpose of it is to help us get an idea for the broader perspective of the extent of abuse that has been taking place in our Anabaptist communities. I'm sure most of you are fairly aware of what's been happening. In the last couple of years, it's coming out of the woodworks. It's coming into the news. The Pittsburgh Gazette brought it out a number of months ago, and it went to all the local papers, Lancaster, Reading, and the Anabaptists. Yeah, and just recently, just last week, it came out I hope you're not familiar with Cosmopolitan magazine, but it just came out in Cosmopolitan magazine about the sexual abuse among the Amish people. And then just recently, a very, very well-known figurehead, he was a minister in different ministries, not only here in the United States. It came out that he's been abusing people for 30-some years. And you know, what I'm asking you to do is just check, circle. There's just that information will not go anywhere. Nobody's going to know it came from Bethel Christian Fellowship. All it will do is help us as we sit down. It gives us the demographics of what's happening in our Anabaptist community. So it's just a help for us, okay? And I will share the composite information with the leaders here if that's what they would like, okay? I also wanted to make an announcement that I got a text last night from Richard Neuswanger, and he asked if he could drive me down here. So Richard Neuswanger is with you and with us, and I got a nice passenger seat drive down here this evening. Richard has been a real huge blessing to me, very instrumental in the many things that in the last number of years have blessed my life. He was my pastor for a number of years. He's now the co-pastor in our church at Family Harvest. But he has blessed me in so many ways. I just appreciate Richard as a brother, as a friend. I'm just telling you, he's a treasure to me, and he blessed me again this evening by offering to drive me down here. We're going to be looking at intentional parenting. I think most of us realize, and you know, what we're going to do is you can't cover parenting in a night, and so we're going to just bump on some things. We're going to spend a little more time on dealing with protecting, preparing our children for their future. I brought some resources. They're spread out here on the front row, and so afterwards, if you want to come up and look at them, some of them are going to be listed on the PowerPoint. But I think most of us realize, and if we don't, we need to, that the battle is won and lost in the home. Our churches, our community, our nation isn't going to be any stronger than what the homes are that are represented there. And you know, God's people are the salt of the earth. They're a light, and they're a city set on a hill. And when we see what's been happening and the news I know we have wonderful people. I love our culture. I support its foundations. But brothers and sisters, we need to really start addressing the core issues of why we're dealing with some of the extent of abuse that we're dealing with in our homes. Now, we're going to spend a little bit of time on that this evening, but we're looking at intentional parenting. Intentional parenting means you take it seriously, and you're not a default parent. Yeah, if you ever watched a relay race where you have different members on the relay team, when they come up, the one person who's running, as he's coming up to the person waiting, that person starts running, and he looks back and he holds his hand back. And the other one who's been running the race up to that point, he holds out the baton. And a lot is either won or lost in that baton passing off. It's easy to drop that baton. And God's plan is that baton gets passed. Yesterday, our scripture reading was in Deuteronomy 6. There we see how that parents are supposed to teach their children every part of the day, as you rise up in the morning, as you go to sleep at night, as you sit down to eat. It's just to be part of our culture, our family community. And so much is either won or lost in the home. And brothers, I don't want to take it easy on the gals. I'm just saying, brothers, I believe that God calls us men to be the ones who will train up our children. And oftentimes, we as men, we used to be on the farm. It was a very agrarian-based culture years ago. I grew up on a farm. Many of you probably did too. But there isn't enough farmland for everybody to be on. And so we moved into the industrial age, and many of us go to work, and we have these jobs where we leave in the morning, we come home at night. But I'd like to encourage you men to think that when you come home at night, your job is just starting. And if you think that your job's done and now you come home and you get to sit, you're missing the mark. You're missing the mark. Because your wife, perhaps, has had those children all day long, or part of the day, and it's your time now to kick in and connect with your children. It's intentional fathering. I am so convinced that it's fathers that hold the key to whether children grow up healthy and strong and with purpose and motive in their life. You gals, absolutely. The moms play a huge role as well. In fact, it's very equal. But God asks men to step up to the plate. He says, fathers, train up your children. He doesn't say mothers, train up your children. He says, fathers, train up your children in the fear and the admonition of the Lord. So men, we need to take it seriously that God is talking to us as men. I put together a list of things years ago of what I saw that we need to focus on to rebuild the foundation of family, to change the future and break the cycle of destruction. And I know I have different people reminding me I spend time with hurting people, and so I end up seeing sort of the negative side of our culture because I end up dealing with people who are hurting. But it's large. It's big. And I've sort of watched that as a culture, we aren't doing that great in parenting. And so I think it's time that we focus on it and we talk about it. That survey that you're filling out or filled out. Now, I'd like to tell you a little bit about that survey. It's been handed out quite a few times. And the very best that I've seen so far is that 1 in 5 girls have been abused in our culture. That's the best. It's been as low as 1 in 3. So, and then it's also for the men there as well, and it's been 1 in 10 young men who have been abused growing up. So when I see a setting like this, I know that there are people here who have experienced abuse. My heart goes out to you. I want you to hear that. I care. And God is the healer, and He's the redeemer. And He wants to restore, and He wants you to rebuild and grow and keep on moving. But I want you to know I care about that. And my goal is, and part of the Anabaptist Awareness for Sexual Abuse, our goal is to make an awareness of what's going on, but also to provide resources. And this coming in a few weeks here, in a week and a half, we're going to be sitting down to plan the next one. And our goal is to provide resources, and not only that, to aggressively pursue giving church leaders the tools they need to teach their congregations what is it going to take for us to get on top of this and win. So I just would like to suggest to you and ask you this question. What do you think? You see, if 1 in 5 is the best, and I'm hoping it's a lot better here, but if 1 in 5 is the best that I've seen, if 1 in 5 people got cancer, would you say we have an epidemic? Would you say that would be an epidemic? I think so. So do you think we have an epidemic on our hands? I think so. And you see, I know there's lots of wonderful, good people in our Anabaptist culture, but 1 in 5 is not acceptable. Brothers, sisters, it's not acceptable. Are you okay with that? We've got to do something about this. It's important. And a lot of it is won or lost in the home. Okay? So let's just keep on going here. So rebuilding the foundation of family. Number one is capturing the hearts of our children. Children grow up and they're young, and I see that young fellow sitting there. Is that Grandpa holding that young man? That's a beautiful picture to me. By Paul Tripp on parenting. And last year we spent 1 month of August, and I headed that up, and we did 1 month where every church service was dealing with parenting. We're taking it seriously. And our congregational name is Family Harvest, so you see there is a focus there as well. But capturing the hearts of our children, if we capture our hearts when they're young, when they're little, and dads, it's not mom's responsibility to raise the children. Yes, they're the nurturer, and that's where children will often go. But dads, your sons need to see you as a nurturer too. And you need to capture their hearts. And we talked about that last night, how that when your children see you, your eyes should light up. They should see how you're delighting in your children. And yes, there are times when they won't see that delight. When they're naughty, then the scowl works too, okay? And they need to know that they need to step up to the plate and do something different. And they need to fear that dad will bring some justice to naughty behavior. That's part of it. But we need to capture our children's hearts, and that's where those foundations for life were that we talked about last night. We need to protect our children from abuse. This to me is big. We need to be proactive protecting our children against abuse, and we're going to talk about that tonight, and some of those resources up here deal with that as well. We need to prepare our children for community. God intended us to live together, to live in community. The first community is family. It's a husband and wife, and then it's children. And the next community is the community that we live in. And of course, church is community. God intends for us to live together. We need to train our children and prepare our children to live in community. And we talked about didn't we talk about the Trinity picture last night? I forget if I had that up there or not. Or maybe that's on this one, I forget. Sometimes I get a little bit mixed up in what I have in front of me here. But yeah, I think that's coming up here, so we'll bear with that for a bit. Prepare your children for puberty. Every one of us is going to grow up, and as your children hit the age when their hormones start kicking in, things start happening, and they go from a child to an adult, and they will grow up. They will go from a child to an adult, but will they grow from a boy into a man and a girl into a woman? Will they truly accept manhood and womanhood? That depends on parents. You might end up with children in adult bodies, and that doesn't work very well. But when those hormones kick in, we need to be able to start early to talk to our children about sexuality. God has designed every single one of us as sexual beings, and there's an intent and purpose there. And if we don't prepare them for it, how are they supposed to learn? I would ask you a question. Do you want your children and your grandchildren to learn about sex the way you learned about it? Okay? You ask yourself that question. Would you want them to learn about sex the same way you learned about it or didn't learn about it? You see, I think God gave children parents to teach them about the most important things in life, and teaching them about sexuality is one of the most important things you can teach your children, and that needs to start early. We'll talk about that. Preparing our children for youth, dating, and courtship. I left some brochures here. Every March we've been doing a Preparing for Marriage weekend, and it's for dating couples and engaged couples. It's up at Wilmersdorf, and it's a pretty intense weekend. Richard helps head that up. He's the MC there, and it's a Friday evening and an all-day Saturday, but we believe that you can prevent 90% of marriage problems by giving healthy and wise preparing for marriage. So that didn't happen when I was married. When Grace and I got married, preparing for marriage wasn't even talked about. You just get married and let your hormones be your guide, and it doesn't work very well. And so when I was ordained years ago, I was determined that as people came and asked me to marry them, I wasn't going to marry them unless we sat down and talked about what's going to take to make a marriage work. And it took a while. It took years to develop a program that I really felt good about. And so we're doing that as a weekend thing, and every March we've been doing that. And then preparing our couples for marriage. Once again, that whole weekend is geared toward that. God's plan. We already talked about, it was read in Deuteronomy 6, and in Genesis 1 through 3, you see God's plan is for family. Get married, husband and wife, become one, and then be fruitful, multiply, and replenish the earth. But then the responsibility is to train those children. Train them so that they become responsible, godly young men and young women. But the goal of God is for godly men and godly women to marry in exclusive covenant commitment and raise happy children who repeat the plan in the next generation. That's God's plan. Okay? And so we need to be prepared for marriage ourselves. And so what are we supposed to do? The key to God's plan is for us to be healed spiritually and emotionally and be God's representatives here on earth. And I appreciated the testimony of a brother, seeking out healing for his hurt and his heart. And we need to do that. If we're struggling, we need to find help. If we're struggling in our marriage relationship, we need to find help. We need to pursue answers so that we know how to make life work. I know Grace and I struggled big time in our marriage. In fact, that's what propelled me to really start helping people, is because our marriage basically, it was over. If we wouldn't have belonged to a fellowship and a belief system that didn't believe in divorce and remarriage, I'm not sure we'd be together. So I'm grateful for that. But I also feel very badly that nobody was there to help us prepare for the most important relationship that you could possibly have, and that's a husband and wife relationship, to start the foundation of a new family. It's important that we start thinking about these things very intentionally. So there's types of parenting. There's survival parenting, and there's default parenting, and survival parenting is let's just get through it, and let's just get through it, and then get them out of the house, and they can start on their own, and then we're free again. Default parenting is well, we're just going to keep on trucking along, and it's going to happen whatever happens. But I believe those two are a recipe for disaster. But I see a lot of that happening. And it's so interesting. I observe people. I watch. And it's so fascinating. I watch children, and I watch their relationship with their parents, and it tells me volumes. And that's why it's so important for us to capture the hearts of our children very young, and be intentional about it. So intentional parenting is a journey from law to principle. We talked about that last night with the diagrams of discipline based on love, belonging, and significance. You start out with law, but you want to move them from you will do this, and this is important, and you must do this, and this in our home, this will happen. And as they gradually get older, you want to replace that with the reasons why. So law is enforcing the what, and that's compliance focus, but principle is teaching the why, and that's a heart focus. You can enforce law, and you can get them to comply, but you'll never teach them principle if you don't have their heart. Okay, you can try all you want, but if you don't have their heart, you won't teach them the principles so that they're governed by internal motivation. That's going to be, I think, tomorrow night. We're going to be talking about internal motivation versus external motivation. Why we do what we do. That's really important to me. Intentional pairing in the Hebrew culture, to teach meant to build relationship. Spending time with a person in order to learn from watching and interacting with them. And this takes time. And by today's standard, it's not efficient, because it takes time doing things that you think you would be a whole lot more productive doing something else. But very few people get old and retire and wish they would have spent more time working and less time with their children and with less time with their family. Some of us are past that stage. Now I get the opportunity to rethink this so I can spend time with my grandchildren. And I'm trying to intentionally do that. But you have the time and opportunity to, if you're parents, whether you're middle-aged or young, you won't regret spending time with your family and connecting with them. So to train a child in the way he should go, and when he's old, he'll not depart from it. A trained child is teachable. Some of you remember when Frank was here. My brother Frank, he was a school teacher for many years. He taught Bible school many times, but he taught at Terry Hill Mennonite School. For many years, he was a principal there. And he made an interesting comment. He said that trained children are teachable. And he says, so children that come to school and they are trained, he says they're ready to learn and they're easy to teach. But he says the problem is you get this mixture of children in a class, and many of them are trained, but some of them are not trained. And he says you invest so much energy training those children so that they can become teachable because they haven't been trained in their homes. And that's a frustration because it takes so much more time and energy to try and train that child in the classroom to respond properly to authorities and properly to respect each other and the boundaries that need to be in place, and to have just proper decision-making and values. So it's important for us to understand that it's important that we train. So one of them is obedience. We need to train, we need to teach our children obedience. They need to obey, and it needs to be in a normal tone of voice. There's not a person here who hasn't had observations about how parents have trained their children. You know, do you ever watch parents count? You know, I'm going to count to 3, and when I count to 3, you better have it. You know, 1, 2, or how about you train them by the decibel rate, right? You speak normal, they don't respond. You speak a little louder, and finally you holler, and you get them to respond. That's disastrous. That's sick. I remember one time I was in Dutch Way Farm Market, and I was coming up one aisle, and I saw this little fella, trucking down the aisle toward me, and his mom was at the other end and said, "You get back here!" He didn't answer. He just kept on going. And so he kept running back and forth between aisles, and she kept jumping from aisle to aisle saying, "You get back here!" And she was hollering at him the whole time. I thought I'd help her. So I saw he was jumping to the next aisle. So I just waited, and as he got close to me, I got down. I said, "You get back to your mom right now." And boy, he spun around, and he hightailed it back to mom. She probably didn't think I did her a favor. You know, you do that today, and you're going to get in trouble, okay? But you see, she was training him. Did you know she was training him? She was training him not to respond. And she probably didn't have any help at home with Dad. So, brothers, sisters, I'm grateful that I had a dad who didn't raise his voice hardly at all. He spoke softly. But he expected us to respond with the first time he told us. And he might give us a little bit of leeway if he thought we might not have heard. And even then, he says, "This will help you listen better." And he would apply the switch of education to the seat of knowledge. Yeah. And it worked pretty good. It really did. But, you know, when Frank and David, my younger brother, and I get together, we talk about some of these things. We say, why did we turn out the way we did? Not that we turned out great. It's just that we have I see in our family there's a high respect for authority, other authority, whether it's police or it's just respect for authority, because our dad taught us to respect authority. There's some family members that I'm pretty close to, and their dad he passed away now, but he was a very conservative minister. And whenever he was a fast driver, and when he'd get stopped, he would, with the children in the car, he'd chew the policeman out. Why aren't you going after criminals? Why are you going after people like me? You know what he was doing? He was training his children too. You know, we train our children different ways. We teach our children different things. And what he did is he taught those children not to respect authorities. To be prompt, not push it off, but to obey now. The next thing is honoring. What does it mean to honor? Honor means to place high value on. And that's what I was just talking to you about. We were taught to honor authority, whether it was people in the church or people or authorities outside of the church. My father was a stickler on that. You honored authority. And you honored each other. He taught us to honor each other and to have respect for each other. And of course, we were normal boys and we fought. But Dad also dealt with that too. And some of it, it's just what's going to happen. But Dad really did teach us to honor each other and to honor property. He taught us to leave things in better shape when we left them than when we found them. I remember my grandfather was that kind of a man too. He borrowed a harrow from the neighbor man, and it was a rusty old thing. But we used it for a season, but before he took it home, he had Frank take a wire brush to that thing and wire brush the rust off, and he painted it, and when he took it back, it looked like new. He believed that when you borrowed something or when you used something, it needed to go back better than when you found it. You see, we can train our children to do things and do things in the right way. What do you think? Okay? I know this, it's just very simple, down-to-earth things, but they're important. They really are. And then to have a servant's heart. You know, Jesus came, he says, I didn't come to serve. I didn't come to be served. I came to serve. And he says, he who wishes to be greatest among you, let him be the servant of all. You see, if we don't teach our children to have a servant's heart early on, then they aren't going to grow up to be servants either. They're going to grow up to be very selfish. Our fallen nature is selfish. We were infected with the... it's all about me. All we like sheep have gone astray. Everyone has turned to his own way, and the Lord laid upon us, God laid upon the Son the iniquity of us all. Isaiah 53, verse 6. You see, in the garden, we were infected with the me problem, the selfishness problem, and it's the role of parents to drive that selfishness out of our children and to teach them to serve. It's really important as children get a little bit older. Fathers need to make sure that they're teaching their children that they must serve. They must serve and serve each other. And he needs to model it by serving. We need to be, as men, we need to be the role model for our children to serve. Capture your children's hearts. And we already talked, this is what we talked about last night. I belong, I am loved, I am valued, and then discipline on top of that. I believe that when we give our children these things, you know, and we do that by, you know, my son's 42 years old now. And you know, when I see him, when we get together, you know, he lives about 45 minutes away, and I might see him once every other week or something like that. We don't, sometimes it's several times a week. But you know, he gets a hug from me. I say, it's sure good to see you, son. And oftentimes I'll just say, you know, son, I'm so glad that I can be your dad. I'm proud to be your dad. You know, I want him to know he belongs to me. He's adopted. Doesn't matter. You know, I don't consider him adopted. He don't consider himself adopted. He's my son. But I want him to know he's my son. I want him to know he's loved, so I will tell him, I love you. And he's 42 years old and his dad's 70. So big deal. Okay? I think it's important we communicate some things. And I tell him he does a good job. I tell him when I appreciate him, you know, I want to give him that significance. And now he's past me disciplining him. But at one time, that was my responsibility too. But I see that doesn't quit. It doesn't quit. You see, that brings security to a child. Empower your child. Abuse involves power and coercion. The need is to protect our children from abusers by giving them the tools to protect themselves and to train them to be responsible and safe people. So how do we do that? We empower our children. I believe it's important for us, and I wanted to bring a booklet along, and I forgot to pick them up at Home Messenger. Are you acquainted with Home Messenger service? It's the Weaver Lane Conference people. They have 2 stores, one in Myerstown, one in Lancaster. They put out a free booklet, and it's When to Say No. Okay, and it's a free booklet, and they're handing it out a lot, and I hand out a lot of them. But you see, we need to give our children tools early on that they know what's good touch and what's bad touch, and when they can, and they need to be empowered so that they can stand up and say no when somebody approaches them. Give them tools and err on the young side. So there's some tools down here. My body is private. I'm not sure. Yes, I have it here. This is not necessarily a Christian book. It's a book it's an old book, but it's called My Body is Private. I like this book. It's well written. It's well done. But it says what's okay touch and what's not okay touch, and when it's okay for doctors to examine them, when it's not okay for other people to touch them, and when it's okay, and it's okay to not let people tickle you when you don't want to be tickled. And so we need to give our children tools. Here's another book. It's called I Said No. It's some tools to use. And here's another one you might have heard of. It's called Protecting Their Purity. It's a thicker book. It's not one for children to read. It's only for adults. Here's another one that says God Made All of Me. It's a book to help children protect their bodies. There's a book here. I have two of them here. It's called The Garden Wall. And it's a good book for young children, especially girls. You can read it to them when they're young, but it's a book that's worthwhile reading all the way up through. And it talks about that when it talks about the garden wall, it talks about the garden. That garden is their body, and how that it's supposed to be a protected garden. And it really does a really good job of communicating it. It's done by Jenny Bishop, and Jenny Bishop also wrote this one called The Princess and the Kiss. It's where it's instilling good values in your children, and it's also giving them tools. What's okay touch, what's not okay touch. You want to do that early. I would say you start reading those kind of things at the age of 2, 3, and some of those are appropriate at very early age. You want your children to know what's okay touch and what's not okay touch. And you know the statistics tell us that the majority of abuse, and I think I probably have it in here, comes from people that they know. Most abuse comes from people they know. There's one there on good pictures and bad pictures. I have that one down there too, I think. You know what? I'm not seeing it. I thought I had it. Good pictures and bad pictures is porn-proofing your children. And you know, as your children will know that it imprints images that you can't hardly get rid of. And it's so important for us to understand the importance of teaching our children to hate porn. Okay, porn will eat your lunch. It'll destroy your future. And you know, today with the advent of technology, on our cell phones, porn is available 24/7, 365. The worst kind of garbage you can bring up in seconds. And you know, you can make all the rules you want. Different churches have rules. You can only have flip phones. You can't have phones that have internet. Tomorrow night I want to talk about inner versus outer motivation, because you know, all the rules that a church wants to make and try and keep their people safe will not work, I can promise you. It has to happen in here. If it doesn't happen in here, it will not work. Why? I've already seen it. Some people have flip phones they use in public, and they got their smartphone that they got at Walmart that they use when nobody else is looking. You see, until we get it in here, the rules aren't going to work. We have to recognize that. That's why we want to capture our children's hearts. We want to start with rules, but we want to teach them principles and values. You want to develop in your children a heart that's sensitive to a heavenly Father who cares about them and loves them, and you teach them to protect their purity, to protect their innocence. And yes, you hate talking to them about some of these things when they're really young. But I'm just telling you, the abuse starts early, and oftentimes it starts with siblings. There's childish curiosity, and if I think we're probably going to get to it. I'm just jumping ahead of the game here. Let's just keep talking here. Let's keep looking. And as you teach your children, you want to be careful you don't plant paranoia. Childhood should be an enjoyable learning experience. And so when you read a book like My Body is Private, you don't want to plant paranoia in them, but you also want to say, you know, if anybody tries to touch you in one of these, where it says that area that's covered by your underwear, you come and tell Dad and Mom. You come and tell us right away. And it's okay for you to scream, holler, bite, kick, and tell. Yell and tell. Okay? We need to give our children tools to protect themselves. You know, in dealing with hurting people, I'm just so many of the hurts go back to sexuality awakened way before its time in some kind of abuse in childhood. I can promise you that. It does. And you know, I've never heard somebody say, come to me and sit there and tell, well, we were playing volleyball and man, that guy, he spiked the ball, hit me in the face, knocked me down, broke my nose, and I can't get over it. I never heard that yet. But I heard it many, many times that somebody touched me inappropriately and took advantage of me. That I hear over and over and over again. Protecting. And you know what? Jesus took this pretty seriously. In Matthew, Mark, and Luke it says, "But whoso shall offend one of these little ones which believe in me, it were better for him that a millstone were hanged about his neck and he were drowned in the depth of the sea." That tells you that Jesus takes this pretty seriously. So we want to protect our children from abuse. Sexuality awakened before its time. God has given the gift of sexuality, and it is a beautiful gift. It's a perfect gift. It's a gift that God gave us. And you know, it's a topic we haven't talked about a lot. One of the things that I normally do when I'm in a church holding revivals or something like that, I ask for the Sunday school hour where I can talk to the adults and the young people, and I talk about the mystery of intimacy, God's plan for sexuality. It's important that we learn that. We teach that at the Preparing for Marriage weekend as well. We need to understand that God gave us the gift of sexuality to show us the kind of intimate relationships He wants to have with us. And you see, when Satan wants to destroy the image of God in the area of sexuality in such a big way that we can't hardly comprehend it. You know, and you see, here it is, 1 in 5 girls experience sexual abuse, 1 in 10 boys, okay? And most of the time it's from family. It's oftentimes from, in the world, they say 75 to 80% from someone they knew. In our environment, it's probably 100%. I would say it is 100%. Very seldom is it otherwise. But in the surveys we've handed out, it's amazing who they have checked off, who have abused them. Even church leaders, uncles, grandpa, grandma. I mean, it's just amazing, the stuff you see and the stuff you hear. I'm just telling you, we must redeem this culture. We can redeem this culture by turning back to God and saying, we must have standards. And we as parents must be proactive in preparing our children so that they are not abused. And men, if we don't have control over our sexuality will destroy us. And we need to teach our young boys that everybody is safe in their presence. Not only do we need to teach our children, not only boys, girls too. We need to teach both boys and girls that you give them the tools so that nobody will touch them inappropriately, but you also give them some very strict instructions that they must not also touch anyone else inappropriately. And if they do, there's going to be some severe consequences. A good friend of ours, they had some friends over to help with a work project. And so this people from, these are brothers and sisters in the Lord. But in the basement, the one 10-year-old boy took the 8-year-old girl in a closet and he was messing with her. She came up and told her parents. And I really appreciate it. They called me, said, "How do we deal with this?" And they went and they talked to the parents, they talked to that young man, and it was dealt with redemptively. So when things happen, you can't prevent everything from happening, but you have to deal with it redemptively. But they really did. They cared for that daughter. But you know what it really did? They stepped up to the plate and they started reading "My Body is Private" to all of their children and telling them how important it was. And they would remind their children, you have a church get-together, you get a church picnic. What are the children doing? It's interesting. I had a young lady say, when you see the children go out to the barn, make sure an adult goes out there very shortly to find out what's going on in the barn. Okay? This is you don't want to develop a paranoia yourself. It's just that you are responsible for your children. And it's important for us to know what's going on. Are you okay to hear this? Okay. This is serious. From curious experimentation. Children are curious. And here's what's very important to me. And so now I put some of this material up here, and some of these things are here, up here in the front row. So well, let's go back to this one. From curious experimentation. What you want to do is you want to give your children, when they have questions, you want to give them age-appropriate answers. Age-appropriate answers. If they ask you a question about their sexuality, give them an age-appropriate answers. Also, when you talk to your children, use the proper names for body parts. A penis is a penis. A vagina is a vagina. A vulva is a vulva. Use right body parts. One of the things that Robin Boyer from Children and Youth in Lancaster says, one of the problems they have in dealing with child abuse is many of the children don't even have right body part names. So then they have to draw pictures and point. Okay? Use the right names. Teach your children the right names for body parts. Okay? It is not a shame thing. It's an educational thing. I know this is tough for us older ones, but it's important that we move intentionally. Abuse comes from childish curiosity that has gotten carried away and experimentation that keeps on going until it becomes abuse. I hear these stories over and over again. I'm not trying to create fear in you. I'm just saying be responsible. Be proactive and teach your children. From pornography, the average age is 11, which means that half are below that age. And I know maybe in our groups that's not true, but it's just amazing. I was a school board chairman, and it was amazing what some children have access to and bring to school. Well, your children go to school, and maybe your children wouldn't have access to it. I'm just telling you, this stuff is real. So you teach your children, and that's where good pictures, bad pictures comes in. You can talk to your children in a very positive approach and say, hate this stuff. It will eat your lunch. It'll destroy you. It will damage your heart. It'll contaminate your spirit. You want to teach your children about that. There's the book, Good Pictures, Bad Pictures. Okay? Responsible use of technology. It's amazing what I see, even in our people, the age that I'm seeing young people have smartphones. And I'm going, why? Why? And I don't know what people are thinking. I really don't. Preparing your children for puberty. Understand that changes are coming. They need to hear it early. They need to hear it appropriately, hear it accurately, hear it progressively, hear it from dad and mom. When you know your children are going to hit puberty, and we need to prepare them for that. We need to talk about them, that pituitary gland is going to kick in, and it's going to start releasing hormones that are going to change them from. And I've already done this with my children, my grandchildren. I'll just say, hey, put your arm up against mine. How comes your arm don't have any hair on it? And we'll just talk about it. I said, well, that comes because after a while your body's going to start secreting testosterone, and that testosterone is going to make hair start growing on your body. It's also going to make your penis and your testicle grow. And for a female, your mothers need to talk to your girls about how that estrogen and progesterone is going to develop them into a woman, and their hips are going to grow and their breasts are going to develop so that they can give birth and nurture children. We need to start being proactive about this. It'd be interesting to ask here, but every young woman, every young girl should know from her mother that her period is going to be coming. It's amazing to me what I hear, that women would tell me that they had one woman said she thought she was bleeding to death. Okay, where was mom? Okay, and what you want to do is you want to celebrate it. You prepare your daughter. You say, hey, listen, this is going to be happening. This is going to be coming. When you notice some spotting or something like that, you come and talk to mom, and we are going to celebrate. And you take her out to a nice restaurant, and you talk to her about what it means to become a woman. Guess what? You're celebrating God's design for womanhood. And you're doing it in a positive way. And then she can embrace it. But be careful, mom. If every time you get your period, you're moaning and groaning and griping, that's not going to be helpful either. I'm sorry. Preachers talk like this? You got to be kidding. Here's a book by Steve and Sandra Ebersole. Maybe some of you know them. They're neighbors to us, not too far away. Anyway, they wrote this book, God, Our Children, and the Facts of Life. You see, there's some very positive things happening. People are writing and doing things. So, you know what instructions we gave you by the authority of the Lord Jesus? It is God's will that you should be sanctified, that you should avoid sexual immorality, that each one of you should learn to control his whole body in a way that is holy and honorable. This is the will of God. It is God's will. So we need to teach our children. We need to prepare them so that they can stand against. And then you teach them to flee fornication. Now, I know this is being broadcast and videotaped, so I got to be a little careful what I say, but you know, that young lady that was with me last night on the way home, we had a father-daughter talk. And I told her, I said, you know, after a while, a young man's going to come along and he's going to be interested in dating you. And I told her, I said, you know, what I did with my daughter is I told my daughter, if a young man comes along, she needs to tell him he needs to ask me. And I told you about that last night. So I told her that too. I said, because you see, if you don't have somebody giving you some direction and protecting you and having a dad talk to that young man and put a trip on him, I said, what happens is when you're in love, you're sort of walking around on your head instead of your feet. And so let's talk about it now while you're on your feet. And so you see, fathers and mothers, we need to prepare our children for dating, for courtship. And if they know that dad and mom are invested in their life, they can do this. So Passport to Purity is talking to your children about their sexuality, ages 11 to 16, and I think that's dads and moms have to sort of make a decision there. And I think I probably even have it on the board up there. Yeah, here it comes. But I brought a pack along with me here. There's like 6 CDs in here, and there's one for parents to listen to, and there's 2 for fathers and sons, 2 for mothers and daughters, and then there's 1 on pornography. And I think that's an older set. We at Encourage Men, we stock those things, and we really do recommend it. We'll have a session where we have several men who have gone over it with their young sons, and they'll give their testimonies about it, and it's a pretty exciting thing. So we recommend that highly. Childish Curiosity, The Age of Wonder, so we already talked about this. Truthful, age-appropriate answers. Unanswered curiosity develops into preoccupation. It leads to vulnerability. It leads to experimentation. Be a safe parent. It must be safe for your children to tell you anything. They need to be able to tell you anything without fear of punishment. And if they start telling you something, you mustn't say, oh, you shouldn't talk about that. No, you want to hear it. Don't you want to know? They better, if you're not the safe person for them to tell and you shut them down. There was I was working with a situation just not too long ago, and these people are now they're grandparents, but when she was a child at home, her brothers were abusing she and her sister, and when she went and told her mom says, stop it. That's all her mom said, was stop it. Never even dealt with the boys, never went to dad. Those boys should have been thrashed to an inch of their life. Okay? But instead, the trip was put on the girls, stop it, and nothing was done to the boys. Today, she is still struggling horrifically, and it's impacting her whole family. This is not okay. This is not okay. It must be safe for your child to tell you anything without fear and punishment, and then also, dads, you need to step up to the plate and make sure that justice occurs. That was one of the things that was really redemptive about that situation with those 2 children. The father went and talked to the other father, and they brought that young man in there, and they put the fear in him. I was just part of that with another young man and his son, another father and his son, just recently, where we sat down, and the son had been messing with his littler sister, and that young man got the fear put in him. Okay, we talked very, very directly, very, very bluntly, and we're staying on top of it. We're staying with him. He's not feeling crushed. In fact, we're building him up. We're encouraging him. We're telling him we believe in him, and we're giving him the tools to use to become a valiant man. Okay, we really are. We're not thrashing people and putting them down. No, we're going to put the fear in them, but then we're going to equip them to become valiant men. Are you with me? Okay. It must be safe for your child to ask you anything and be given truthful, age-appropriate answers. You need to be your child's educator and their protector. Be a wise parent, connected, responsible, enjoyable lifestyle. Your children love to have fun, and you need to have fun with them. If you can't have fun with them, you probably can't teach them either. I love to have fun. Mealtimes. Mealtimes are a great time to teach. You know, mealtime should be a relaxed time. It's not the time when you whip people into shape. I've just heard too many stories where mealtimes were just dreadful because Dad was just cracking the whip and everything had to just be right. Well, it wasn't that way at our table. Yeah, there were manners. You had to have manners, but we ended up having a lot of fun at the table, and there was a lot of good discussion. Mealtimes are a great time for having good family time. Waking and bedtime consistency. I think it's very important that you have some structure in your home where children understand that. They have to have responsible chores that they need to carry out, and it's important, and there's consequences if they don't. I'm going to give you a little bit of a tidbit here. My brother's wife, Frank and Lois, they had a rule in their house that before you go to school, your bed had to be made. And so instead of enforcing that and policing it, what she did is she said that if your bed's not made, you don't get dessert that night at supper time. And if somebody's bed wasn't made, she made an extra nice dessert. And so she served it, and it wasn't handed around. It was placed in front of them, and that person didn't get any, and they knew better than to argue. You see, you don't have to. You see that's a motivating factor that if they want dessert, they're going to have their bed made. So there's creative ways of getting your children to do what needs to be done. Okay, I like that approach. I also like the approach that Frank used. It was important to have devotions, but he also know that as the children got older and varied things going on, I was there already when they would sit at the table and they had the prayer, and then while everybody else started eating, Frank would read the scriptures while they were eating. And I go, wow. I thought that was really wise because the children were getting older, and then after supper they would scatter. But you know what? They had time in the Word. I'm not telling you that's the way you ought to do it. I just found that pretty fascinating. So be a wise parent. Okay, here's what I was talking about earlier, and we're going to run out of time. I didn't even get to the diagram here. But the Trinity structure, the Trinity is the model for kingdom social structures. So I'm just going to try and buzz through this real quick, see if this makes sense. You see, God is one God. Behold, O Israel, the Lord your God is one God. But you see, God is also a Trinity. He is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. God says, and let us make man in our image. And so what you end up here is you have a diversity working for the same cause and purpose. The Father, Son, and Holy Spirit are different, but they work together as one God. And so He designed us to do that. He put father and mother and children together in a family. And so when you have man plus woman, it equals one. And then you add children to it, and then you have them all working for the good of the family. Why do you take the trash out? Because the trash needs to be taken out. Why do you help clean off the table after supper? Because it needs to be done. Why do you make your bed? So mom doesn't have to do it. You see, you teach your children disciplined lifestyle so that they are all working, so the family structure works good, and you don't have a frustrated mom because no one else is helping. And fathers need to make sure that it's happening. Dads need to enforce the fact that the chores do need to get done. Okay? Mom does that earlier, but I often say that dads need to protect mom. He needs to protect mom from the children as they get older. Because children can get pretty mouthy as they get older, especially when the hormones kick in. Do you know, you get an older gal in the family. I watched that with my daughter. I just ran into it with another situation just recently. And there's not room for two queens in a castle. Okay? Two queens in a castle will fight. So dad needs to remind his daughter that she's a princess, not a queen. And the queen rules, okay? Dad needs to do that. And if you ever have a challenge with your child speaking disrespectfully to your wife, men, you don't say, you are not going to speak to your mom that way. Instead say, you will not talk to my wife that way. You see, all of a sudden, you put a different twist on this thing, and all of a sudden he realizes or she realizes, I'm talking about dad's somebody that belongs to dad, and dad's protecting her. Just another twist that works. Okay, the Trinity is father, mother making decisions based on what's best for the family, and they train their children to make decisions on what's best for the unit. And so they teach their children to live responsibly in community. Does that make sense? Okay. The opposite of this is we're all on our own. It's called the nuclear family. That's what's happening around us in our world. But God wants the Trinity as the model. All right, discern between childish curiosity and wrong behavior. Punishing childish curiosity can push curiosity into preoccupation. Correcting wrong behavior without empowering or giving them tools will cause anger. I wish we could just unpack this. We're running out of time. So when you're around your children, watch for changes in moods and behavior. Oftentimes, if a child is receiving unwanted touch and wrong touch, that'll change their mood and their behavior will change. Watch for that. And then have some individual connecting time, maybe at bedtime. Find out if all is well with them. Know the environment you're placing your children in. Babysitting, child sitting, overnight stays. Be careful with that. Okay? Just because it's family, it doesn't mean it's safe. Just because it's family, it doesn't mean it's safe. A lot of wrong touch comes within the family structure. So you just need to be alert and be aware. So here's the diagram, and it is time to quit, but let's just look at it quickly. So much of our culture teaches that honor and obedience are the same thing. I'd like to suggest honor isn't even in their scope, but can they obey? Yes, you can teach a young child to obey. But then as they get older and they get into the age of comprehension, then they can start honoring. You teach them to honor. You teach them respect. You teach them politeness and manners. And so what happens is you have this crossover that takes place. And right there, that crossover takes place. You teach your children to obey, and they need to obey. But as they get older, once they get up to the age when they get married, when you get married, you no longer need to obey your parents. Please hear that. When you get married, you no longer have to obey your parents. It says a man should leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife. He needs to grow up, be a man, and make their own decisions. Now it's wise for them to go back to their parents and ask for advice. That's honoring them. But oftentimes you'll have parents of married children, and they're trying to tell their children what to do. That's wrong. That's wrong. Now you're imposing your will on them, and now you see. There is a difference between honoring and obeying. We are to honor our parents always. We're to obey our parents as long as we are under their rule. And it's important for us to see that. And what happens is right here, in the ages like 5 to 15, you're going to have a lot of tension and communication going on, because that's where this crossover takes place. And it's time to quit. And I'm not able to explain this, so I guess we just need to wrap it up and quit. But what you want to, for example, say you're a mom and you have a wedding coming up in 2 weeks, and you tell your daughter, she's maybe 12 years old, say, you need to get that dress sewn so you have that new dress to wear for your wedding, for the wedding that we're going to go to. And she goes, so today I want you to start working on that. You can finish it up today and tomorrow. And the daughter says, yeah, but I have other plans, and I want to do this, this, and this. So now mom can say, I'm telling you, you're going to sew that dress and you're going to do it. Okay, now what she's doing is she's using her authority to enforce it on her daughter. But at 12 years old, that's probably a mistake. It would be better for her to say, okay, I'm going to give you that leeway because you have some days here to work on it, but don't forget it, because if you forget to get that dress done, you're going to wear your old dress to the wedding. So she gives her daughter the responsibility of making the choice to put it off. So what if she puts it off and then she forgets it? And she gets a couple days away from the wedding and, Mom, the dress isn't ready. Yeah, I'm sorry. You're going to wear your old dress. Okay, you see, what she did is she taught her daughter responsibility, and she could have maybe reminded her once. I don't know. You can decide that. But you see, if you enforce it, you don't teach them to take on responsibility and to honor you in communicating to them. And so there's going to be tension. And so, that kind of habit, right, when she realizes that she's not going to get her dress done, you think there's going to be tension? You betcha there's going to be tension. She's going to be unhappy. Daughter's going to be unhappy. And mom just has to say, well, I'm sorry, I really wanted you to get that dress done. I would love to have you wear that new dress, but you had that choice to make. Okay? So that was maybe a poor excuse, but so anyway. What you end up with is when they get older, now you have people with healthy emotions. So here's the opposite. Fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath. So what you have here is you have obey and honor all together, and you have control here. And so you control your children even after they get up to the age of 20 and 30. And so what do you end up with the father doing? He quotes Scripture. It says, children, obey your parents and honor your parents. And so you have dad quoting Scripture to the children even when they're adults and they may be married. And what this does is it produces two kinds of people. It produces these adults on the opposite spectrum here and make decisions. On the other hand, you have an adult who maybe was more strong-willed, but because they were kept a child, now they're full of anger and frustration and resentment, and they say, I must have control, and they're fighting for control. So what you end up with is you have very unhealthy children. And maybe dad had 2 farms. Maybe he gave each of them a farm. And so now you have unhealthy people. They marry, they have children, and they're going to do the same thing all over again. So if you have somebody over here on this spectrum here. So what if the neighbor comes over and says, hey, could I use your tractor? I need a tractor with a loader. Mine isn't working. Oh, and he says, well, yeah, sure, you can have it. So if the neighbor takes it, and he never brings it back, and after a while, he goes looking for it. Well, the neighbor says, well, I left it out in the woods, and he goes out in the woods, and here's the tractor damaged, and I won't loan you anything. So you end up with 2 people. Because of the anger and frustration at the way they were raised, they were kept children. They couldn't grow up. They couldn't make logical. Yeah, we tried to put 20 pounds of flour in a 10-pound sack. So thank you. It's good to be with you.
One of the things that I remembered you said early on, a trained child is teachable, and I believe that. I think that's true. So many of us, parents, at least I think so, made a lot of mistakes.